For Parshas Vayetze, I want to start with a citation from the Haggadah, because Pesach is not far away, and we got to start cleaning. Oh my God! It's almost Hanukkah. Means we got to start cleaning for Pesach, right? So let's review a passage from the Haggadah. The Haggadah says, "V'hi sha'amda la'avoseinu v'lanu," that this covenant that God made with the Jewish people has stood well for us, for our ancestors and for us. Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu l'chalotenu. Not only has one nation risen up against us to destroy us, ela shebechol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu. But in reality, in every generation, they rise up against us to destroy us. V'hakadosh baruch hu ma'atzileinu miyadam. And Hashem always saves us. That's a very beautiful part of the Haggadah. We lift up our cups of wine, and it's something that we can proudly say. But the very next line is Tzei ulmad, go out and learn. Ma bikesh Lavan ha'arami la'asod liYaakov Avinu. What did Laban the Aramean seek to do to our patriarch Yaakov? Sheparo lo gazar ela al hazicharim. Paro only decreed against the males. V'Lavan bikesh la'akores akol. And Lavan tried to uproot everything or everyone. Shenamar, as it says, Arami oved avi vayered Mitzrayim. As it says, that an Aramean sought to destroy my father, and afterwards my father went down to Egypt. Now, that's the way the Baal Haggadah translates that pasuk. That pasuk is from Deuteronomy, from Parshat Ki Tavo, and it is supposed to be recited by a person who was bringing his bikurim, who was bringing his first fruits to Jerusalem. And as in an expression of gratitude, the Torah says that when you place your basket down of first fruits from your farm, and you want to express your gratitude to Hashem for having blessed you so amply with this fresh crop, you start off by saying very humbly, Arami oved avi, that an Aramean sought to destroy my father. Others learn the passage differently, that Arami oved avi does not refer to Lavan, but my father was a wandering Aramean, which is referring to Avraham Avinu. But clearly that's not the way the Haggadah, the author of the Haggadah, who's from the Talmudic period, understands that passage. The passage means that an Aramean sought to destroy my father, and the Aramean is referring to Lavan, because that's what the Haggadah says. And after he sought to destroy my father Yaakov, Yaakov, went down to Mitzrayim, went down to Egypt. And that's how our people ended up in Egypt. And then God took us out of Egypt, liberated us, and that's why we're back, and we came back to Eretz Yisrael, and that brings us to today, which is why I'm able to bring you my first fruits, and I'm so grateful. I have 4 questions, not the 4 questions of the Haggadah, but just 4 simple questions, and they're on your page so that we can study them together. Number 1, why does the Haggadah choose to contrast Paro with Lavan, thus minimizing, it appears, the evil of Paro? Is this an appropriate exercise on the night when we wish to show our gratitude to Hashem for saving us from Paro? Is the night of the Seder a night to express our gratitude for being saved from Lavan or for being saved from Paro? If it's the night that we're thanking God for saving us from Paro, then why are we minimizing Paro? We're saying, you think Paro was bad, Lavan was even worse. Why are we doing that? Why is that an appropriate exercise the night of the Seder? If anything, we should be accentuating the badness of Paro, not minimizing it. Question number 2. If you wish to cite an example of an enemy of Yaakov Avinu, would not Esav be a better choice? Someone who posed an actual physical threat instead of Lavan, Yaakov's father-in-law. I mean, Yaakov probably called him Abba or Dad. okay, they didn't get along. It was probably an uncomfortable relationship. But to say that he was the most formidable enemy that Yaakov ever had to face in his life, is that really so? I mean, wasn't Esav a much bigger threat to Yaakov than Lavan? Question number 3. Why does the Torah in Parshas Kitavo, where this passage originates, refer to Lavan as the Aramean instead of simply Lavan Oved Avi? Why not call him Lavan by name? And question number 4, what in the world is Lavan's connection to our descent into Egypt? Now, while it's true that the book of Genesis contains a lot of stories about the life of Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov lived with Lavan for 20 years. He grew a family. He had 11 sons and a 12th son born on the way back into Eretz Yisrael. All of that is true. But Yaakov did not end up in Egypt as a result of his interactions with Lavan. What do the two have to do with each other? Arami Oved Avi Vayered Mitzrayim. The two are not really connected in any way, are they? One is a story in Parshas Vayetze, and the other one, how did Yaakov end up in Egypt? We all know the story, right? He ended up in Egypt because of Yosef. He ended up in Egypt because of Yosef, not because of Lavan. So why are they being connected by the passage in the Torah the way that the Haggadah understands it? These are pretty basic questions when you think about it. As far as, the way we look at the Haggadah, it just doesn't seem to make any sense. 4 really, really basic questions.
Are you looking for an answer or no?
I would please go right ahead.
Well, it just seems to me that we're talking about spiritual demise, not so much physical demise. That we were saved in Egypt, but the point is that we came out a nation who didn't change their dress and their language, and they were still a nation of Hashem. And you get the answer to your question in the first sentence you quoted from the Haggadah, that in every generation somebody rises up against us to spiritually annihilate us. And that's the point, that they can't spiritually annihilate us even though they try to physically annihilate us.
Okay, so you're saying the Lavan is the greater threat.
Exactly.
Because he represents the spiritual. Okay, good. So I want to develop this idea and take it into a certain direction. As you may have heard me say before, one of the most destructive ways that Lavan interacted with Yaakov was specifically not to threaten him physically, even though that's the way some of the Meforshim understand. Because at the end of the parsha, it says, Yesh la'el yadi la'asoti machem ra. That Lavan says to Yaakov, he says, I had in mind to really pick a fight with you, and he meant it physically. He came after Yaakov. After Yaakov fled under the cover of night with his whole family, Lavan pursued him, and he says, I was really going to wipe you out physically, but Hashem told me not to. So that's the simple understanding. But there are so many hints to the more destructive, corrosive element that Lavan was to Yaakov from the few interchanges that we see them have in our parsha. The Torah says that Yaakov loved Rachel. He said, Vayomer, Evadecha sheva shanim berachel bitecha haketana. He says, you know what, I have a proposal for you. I'd like to work for you for 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. So Lavan's response is very curious. If you were proposed, if someone named Yaakov Avinu came over to you and said, I'd like to marry your daughter, you'd probably say, I'm honored. Right? It would be such an honor for you to marry my daughter. But Lavan's response is not that. Lavan's response is, Tov titi osalach mititi osali ish acher. Okay, better I should give her to you than to give her to some other guy. Now, how do you think Yaakov feels after getting a response like that?
That's typical shidduchim.
Typical shidduchim? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Okay, I'll let him go out with her. She's better than nothing. I'll let her go out with him.
Better than nothing.
Exactly.
Right. Which that's pretty pathetic, though, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not a very nice way to respond to someone, right? But this displays a pattern for us. The pattern of what Yaakov had to endure for 20 years is that he basically was worthless in Lavan's eyes, in his father-in-law's eyes, despite the fact that he was the great Yaakov Avinu. And as a young man, people rise to greatness over the course of their lives, but Lavan should have detected the greatness within Yaakov. And there was a constant, like we learned before, when I mentioned to you, Lavan is called Lavan because he comes across as being very pious and holy. There are a lot, I mentioned in a drush a couple weeks ago, there are a lot of laws that we learned from Lavan. Lavan taught us how to take care of marriages. I just gave a shir last night that we learned from Lavan that when all things are equal, and they're usually not, but when all things are equal, you're supposed to marry off the older child before the younger child in your family. Now, remember, that's when all things are equal, but as I said, most times all things are not equal. But the point is, where do we get this principle from, this ideal? We get it from Lavan. We get another ideal from Lavan in this week's parsha. Lavan said, okay, you've already married Rachel, Leah, you want to marry Rachel, right? You have to wait 7 days, right? You have to wait 7 days before you can marry Rachel. And what do we learn from that? So we learn Sheva Brachos, and we also learn the concept of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. The Gemara in Yerushalmi says that you learn from here that you're not allowed to mix one Simcha with another Simcha. If you're going to marry two women, you got to wait till the happiness of the first wife is over before you enter into marriage with the second wife.
That's 1 week.
It just takes 1 week, then the magic wears off after the first week. After the Simcha of the first marriage is over, only then you have to wait. Just like you can't mix one Simcha with another, like we know. And what's an example of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha? You're not allowed to get married on Chol HaMoed. You can't have weddings on Chol HaMoed because of Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. You can't mix the Simcha of Yantif with the Simcha of a Chasana.
Could you have a double wedding?
You can't have a double wedding. Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, right? You're not supposed to do that, right? 7 brides for 7 brothers? No, it doesn't, it's not going to work. Okay. Right, so we learn very interesting halachas from Lavan. Why is that? Because Lavan was, in his external appearance, the way he presented himself was white. That's what the word Lavan means. He was white in his purity and his piety. If you would have met Lavan on the street today, I don't know, maybe he's the one that wore a shtreimel. I mean, he really came across as a very heiliger guy, as a very holy person. And there was just something a little bit off with him, that what was off about him was that he wouldn't allow people to realize their greatness. He had to constantly shtach in a very, very subtle way, give subtle insults to Yaakov. And that was the thing that was most corrosive and really ultimately almost meant that the formation of the Jewish people never got off before it even started. We would have never have started as a nation had Yaakov succumbed to that psychological warfare that Lavan had played on him. And I don't even call it spiritual warfare. That's one way of looking at it, but I call it psychological warfare. I'm sure that everyone in this room has gone through situations in life, whether it was when you were in grade school or high school or university, some point in your life when you interacted with someone who tried to make you feel insignificant or unimportant. I know it certainly happened to me plenty of times in the course of my interactions with people. It still happens to me even today. So if people do that to me, I imagine that people probably do it to every single person, right? How many of you have never had that experience before in life? No, everyone's had that experience in life, right? There are people who try to make the other person less than because of their own insecurity or their own desire to be elevated. But it's a terrible position to be put in because then you're filled with self-doubt. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am worthless. Maybe I don't size up. Maybe I shouldn't be pursuing this thing that I'd like to pursue because maybe I'll fail, like that person has suggested. Am I worthy of marrying Rachel? If Lavan's whole approach is, yeah, okay, you're better than nobody, better than some other guy. So that's the attitude. There's a story about the Chafetz Chaim He was once traveling and he addressed the Jewish community outside of Warsaw. And he said, Chevra, do you know, I'm not so big on traveling to Warsaw. What do you think I'm doing in Warsaw in the first place? He said, I'm trying to get a passport so that I can make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. That was really the Chafetz Chaim's desire. He wanted to make Aliyah. This, I guess, is sometime in the early 1930s. But he said, when I tried to get a passport from the local government office in my town of Radin, they told me that I have to produce a birth certificate. Now, the Chafetz Chaim in the early 1930s was probably in his late 80s, maybe early 90s. He said, I have no birth certificate. In Radin, 100 years ago, they weren't giving birth certificates. But they refused to help me. And they said, no birth certificate, you can't emigrate. So I came to Warsaw, hoping that the government officials would be more helpful. But they too told me that I would either have to produce a valid birth certificate or at least present 2 witnesses from my town attesting to my birth. That they were there when I was born. Bring witnesses. He said, I'm well into my 80s, and I was born in a small village. He says, how am I going to produce 2 witnesses that were there at the time when I was born? He says, these people would have to be in their 90s. And that I could find these 2 people that were in my village when I was born. They remember the little Yisrael Meir Kagan was born. He says they were completely unsympathetic, these government officials in Warsaw. How is it, asked the Chafetz Chaim, that a country that is normally based on sound, reasonable laws could be so unreasonable? That was the question that he asked his crowd when he was giving them this drasha. And you know what his answer was? He said, take a look at Lavan. He said, take a look at Lavan, and now let's look at another passage of Lavan. After Yaakov leaves under the cover of night, he's taken all of the sheep, he's taken all of his children, he's taken his wives, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah. He's got a huge camp with him after having spent 20 years in Lavan's house. And Lavan says, you guys stole from me. Where are my terafim? Where are my little statuettes? And Yaakov says, I don't know. I didn't take your statues. Has anyone seen Lavan's statues? No one says. But Lavan, if you want to search, go ahead. Search all the tents and see if you can find anything that belongs to you. So finally, after Lavan spends all of this time searching, the Torah says in Pasuk Lamed Vav, Vayichar liYaakov vayorav b'Lavan. That Yaakov just lost it. He just said, I've had enough of this. He says, Ma pishi ma chatosi ki dolakta acharai. What did I do that was so terrible that you decided that you had to come and pursue me? Ki mishashta es kol kelai. You've gone through all of my possessions. Ma matzasa mikol kalei veisecha. What have you found that belongs to you? Sim ko neged achai ve'achecha v'yochichu bein shenei. Put it down right here on the floor. If you found anything that belongs to you, put it down right here, and let's see what you got. So you know what Lavan's, and then Yaakov, of course, says, he says, I've worked for you for 20 years. I haven't slept a wink during that period of time. I've been a faithful servant. I have never absconded with anything for personal gain. Everything that I worked for was for your household. And all of this that I have now is my compensation, far less than what is really due to me. And he says, were it not for the fear of God that I have, ki atah rekam shalachtani, you would have sent me away empty-handed, were it not for the fear of God that I had up until now. And part of what Yaakov is trying to say is, not only would I have been left empty-handed physically, but I would have left as a shell of a person. But I always focused on my father. I always focused on Avraham. I always focused on Yitzchak. I focused on the inherent greatness from where I stem. And it was that confidence that allowed me to move forward despite your constant hammering away at me. So after this whole soliloquy that Yaakov presents to Lavan, you look at Pasuk Mem Gimel, and what Lavan is totally nonplussed. He is totally unfazed by Yaakov's impassioned argument. And what does he say? Vayan Lavan vayomer el Yaakov. So Lavan answers and he says, Habanot benotai, v'habanim banai, v'hatzon tzoni, v'chol asher ata ro'eh lihu. So what does he tell him? He says, the daughters are mine. The children are mine because they're my grandchildren. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have any children. He says, the sheep are my sheep. Everything that is here belongs to me. You're nothing without me, is basically what he's telling Yaakov. So the Chafetz Chaim looked at this story and he said, look, Yaakov gave a very legitimate argument. He said, Yaakov says, I came with nothing. I built up this whole camp while working faithfully for you for 20 years. What is it that belongs to you? This is from me. And Lavan says, you're a nobody. You couldn't have gotten any of this without me. And the Chafetz Chaim said, that's the way the Warsaw government officials are looking at me. He says, I can give them any argument in the world, but if they view me as a nobody, so then my argument falls on deaf ears. And that's the only way that you can possibly explain it. He says, when a government official looks at you in the eye and says, sorry, you don't have the paper, next. Essentially what that government official is telling you is, you don't count as a person. And we've all had that experience, especially in Ontario, I'm sorry to say, because the government workers that are here don't look at you as a human being, at least with rare exceptions. Sometimes you get a really nice person at the desk. But the people who are just there to get their salary and go home, the reason why they can just look at you in the eye and say, sorry, you don't have your paperwork, and therefore you don't count, and you give them a reasonable argument. So the Chafetz Chaim said, it's because I don't count as a person. Just like Yaakov didn't count as a person. This was the greatest threat that Yaakov faced in his lifetime. And that's why the Jewish people needed to go down to Egypt. In other words, there was, and I would argue this, that there was a remnant of this threat that Lavan posed within the Jewish people, latent, and it's within any people. Am I truly worthy? Am I truly worthy of being the chosen people? Am I truly worthy of being a Yaakov? Am I truly worthy of being a Jew? Am I truly worthy of having God to communicate to me? The Egyptian exile was necessary so that the Jewish people would experience a face-to-face redemption experience where God, bichvodo uva'atzmo, in himself in his glory, would demonstrate his might and his strength just for the sake of this group of slaves, and would show that we are worthy. We deserve to be exalted and elevated. That was the whole reason why Hashem put us in Egypt in the first place, to teach us our value, to teach us that we are deserving to be the chosen people. But it's the same reason why Yaakov had to go through that experience with Lavan, to be able to emerge from it whole. And that I also believe is the reason why he's known as the Aramean, Arameo Vedavi. There's a very interesting passage in the Gemara, and with this we'll conclude. Source number 4 says, Omer Rav Yehuda, La'olam al yishal adam tzrachav b'lashon arami. A person should never petition God using the Aramaic language. And why is that? V'omer Rabbi Yochanan kol hashol tzrachav b'lashon arami, ein malachei hasharet nizkakin lo, she'ein malachei hasharet makirin b'lashon arami. It's a very bizarre Gemara that we really need a lot of time to unpack. But for our purposes today, what the Gemara is stating is that if a person petitions God in Aramaic, the angels, who normally are in charge of bringing your prayers up to heaven, they're just going to leave those prayers at the door. Because angels don't understand Aramaic. So if you say Aramaic words, they're going to say, "Ew, no, we're not going to touch those Aramaic prayers, and they're not going to bring it up to heaven." That's what the Gemara is saying. Now, I know there's a lot of questions on this Gemara. There's inherently so many questions you could ask on this Gemara. But here's the one thing that I want to just extract from the Gemara for just a moment. And that is, what does the Gemara mean on the simplest level? So Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, one of the classic medieval commentaries on the Talmud, explains that it's not that they don't understand Aramaic, but they despise Aramaic as a language. They love Hebrew, they love French, they love English, they love Italian, they love other languages, but they can't stand Aramaic. And that's why they're just going to leave Aramaic. We don't want to get Aramaic. That. Now, of course, you can ask a lot of questions. One of the questions is, well, what about Kaddish? Why is Kaddish in Aramaic? Right? Okay. I know. Okay? But we're going to leave. There's so much to discuss about this Gemara that we don't have time for. But the one thing that we have to understand is, why Aramaic? What's wrong with Aramaic? Why do the angels have such a disdain for it? So Rav Yom Tov Lippman Heller, who lived in the 17th century, explained as follows. He wrote a commentary on the Rosh called the Madani Yom Tov. And he explained that the reason why angels, he says, after all, if anything, Aramaic is one of the closest languages to Hebrew. So shouldn't it have some inherent holiness just because of its similarity to the Hebrew language? And he said something amazing. He said that it's very similarity to Hebrew that makes it so despicable to the angels. Because it's one thing to take something which is completely foreign to Hebrew. It's not trying to be imitative. It's not trying to be in any way to try and fake us out. It's something totally different. That the angels will tolerate. But if you take something, just imagine for a second a replica of the Mona Lisa that is done by a first-year art student. And you look at that picture and you can clearly see that that's not the Mona Lisa. So it's not just that you're going to say, that's not the Mona Lisa, you're going to turn up your nose to it and say, Feh, look at it, it's such a disservice that you've done to the Mona Lisa. That's the disdain that the angels have for Aramaic. Feh, Hebrew, look what you've done to our beautiful language. You've twisted it and distorted it. And that's Lavan. Lavan is the Jew with the pious appearance who distorts us and twists us like a pretzel and tries to use piety in order to be destructive. It's one thing to have someone who's not Jewish and who's not religious and is not pious to speak to you harshly and disdainfully. It's another person for someone who's a pillar of the community and is held up in high regard for their piety and their chesed, and for that person to mouth off and to tell you that you're worthless, that's the most insidious and dangerous kind of weapon that can be used. And that's what posed the greatest threat to the Jewish people. Because Yaakov would have been destroyed in one of two ways. He either would have been destroyed by realizing that Lavan is right and he's worthless, or he would have learned to become a Lavan. He would have learned to do the same thing with his own children, and to constantly put them down in very subtle ways, and still be pious and do chesed and do tzedakah, but learn how to give a backhanded compliment in one way or the other. And that would have destroyed us as a people. Anytime you find that within our community, you have to realize that there are still Lavans, there are vestiges of Lavan that still exist. And that part of our challenge in every generation is to resist the temptation to succumb to the Lavans that are within our own purview. And that is far more pernicious and dangerous to the Jewish people than any external threat, than any Paro or any Esau. Now you go back and look at those questions and you'll see the answer to all four questions. We'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day.